Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another show of Cyber Risk Ready and our podcast today with Mr. Brian O'Hara. So um, today we're going to be talking about what makes a great virtual information security officer. So from technical expertise to communication, sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold. So communication skills. What is it that organizations might be looking for a virtual CISO? And so we're going to be talking about a few things today. We're going to talk with our esteemed co-host, Brian O'Hara, and we're going to talk a little bit about business drivers, personal qualities, job responsibilities, and then cost. So stay tuned. Passion, hard work on the Cyber Risk Ready channel. We're here and we're going to get going. So welcome, Brian.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. So, hey, Brian, I know you've got a ton of experience working in the virtual CISO space. So you've been doing it for a lot of years. And so I wanted to just kind of open up and talk a little bit about that experience and kind of what you've seen in your time serving in that role.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so as you said, I worked as a virtual CISO for a number of companies over the past 15 years. What I found mostly was companies weren't completely sure they wanted or needed a CISO in their organization. I think they felt a little more comfortable sort of, I don't know, taking a test spin, if you will, trying out an ISO to see what that's like, what that really means, what that's going to do to the organization. And in order to do that effectively, you have to be able to talk to executives. I had lunch with an old friend of mine the other day who made the comment that and in his role, and he'll be a guest with us in a few weeks now, in his role at Microsoft, he has to be prepared for anyone who's in the room. And the same is true as a virtual CISO. When I go in to meet with executives, I have no idea whether I'm going to be in front of presidents or vice presidents or chief financial officers or line staff or what. And I have to be prepared to answer their questions all the way from, you know, is the firewall that we bought worth anything? Clear up and including how's this going to impact our bottom line at the end of the year? That kind of stuff.
Sure. When you talk to those folks, about these different companies, about that kind of service, what is it that you think that they're looking for, or what's the value proposition that you try to sell them? I've got some ideas here that we can talk about,
Sure.
but I just wanted to get your first blush on it.
Well, one of my clients said it, I think, best one time when he said I was there to check up on him to make sure he's not missing anything. So I acted as sort of a real-time auditor as well as a business and security consultant. So not only was I engaged in advising in terms of what best practices should be in place, what standards are we meeting, and if so, are we in fact meeting them? And also then looking under the covers at the same time, where an external third party who might come in as an auditor might write you up for something like that and put it on paper, which means now you're required to do something about it. Whereas a virtual CISO, I can go to the executives and talk offline about what I think might be going on that they need to address without it becoming public knowledge or part of the record, if you will. Some of the companies I work with were publicly traded, so they're very skittish about anything that might upset the apple cart, if you will, with either the SEC or with stockholders or anything else. Private companies were more concerned just simply about the financial aspects of it, where the public companies typically were much more concerned about reputation, about things getting out that might harm or damage the reputation, which then in turn damages their relationship with their stockholders and or their stock value, if you will, as
Sure.
well as regulators.
It's interesting. I think in this day and age, here in early 2025, where compliance, although probably still is, people are still kind of trying to struggle with kind of understanding whether or not they actually have to do anything with it.
Right.
Some people are just. We talked last week about just checking the boxes about that kind of thing. But I really think that the trends are changing for some of these entities in that they're going to have to be compliant, and they're going to have to prove that they are over time. And so,
They still fight. Yeah, they still fight that pretty hard, though. I'll give you an example of an organization I was dealing with a couple of years ago, just after we came out of COVID. And I just had a conversation with the CIO about implementing multi-factor authentication in their Office 365 environment. He was dead set against it. He thought it was too complicated, that it would irritate employees, they'd get too much backlash for it. And shortly after that meeting, we went into another meeting with their insurance provider that provides their cybersecurity insurance. And the very first question out of their mouth was, do you have multi-factor authentication enabled in your Office 365 environment? And the room just went dead quiet. The net is people don't like to change. I don't care whether you're a CEO or a CFO, people don't like it. It's uncomfortable. They don't like having to press the boundaries of that stuff. So had to spend a fair amount of time smoothing feathers and explaining to them that this is not going to disrupt your workflow. This is in the best interest of your employees, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes they still just push back on it. They just don't want to do it.
Sure.
It's kind of like it's not too unlike the company that gets hacked for ransomware, et cetera, and they refuse to report it because they're not required to by law or by regulations, and they just keep their mouth shut, and they pay the ransom, and they're out a bunch of money, and if they can survive, fine. If not, they might go bankrupt. It's really terrible that they just don't want to listen sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up an interesting point, and I know we've talked about it on a couple of previous shows, just the whole idea of cyber insurance. And a lot of those questionnaires that an organization might get, I mean, they're 10, 12 pages, easy.
Oh, easy.
Yeah, with trying to figure out how secure an organization is. And
well,
if you're
that's
a small shop, a virtual CISO might be the perfect answer to help navigate some of that stuff.
right. That's a rather new occurrence as well. That was another one that security professionals and auditors have been pounding our fists about for 10 years now, is shouldn't organizations who put the effort, energy, and dollars behind a solid security program benefit from that with their insurance premiums? And so insurance companies are finally beginning to ask those questions. I don't think it's to the point yet where that will have a financial impact. It's really more of a checkbox. Either you have it or you don't. If you have it, your premiums are going to be this. If you don't, your premiums are going to be that. Not a matter of, okay, you've got 27 of these checked and only 2 of these not. That should bring you in line with, other companies that are doing similar things, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Yeah. I have seen some of those questionnaires where, they're still pretty high level.
Right.
They don't get into looking at evidence or any of those other kinds of things. And so
because they don't have the expertise. They don't have
Right.
the expertise in-house or on staff to be able to know what to ask, which is sad because they're missing the boat, and it winds up costing them money in the long run because of claims.
But yep, I think that's 100% correct. So with regards to to the whole topic of virtual CISOs, from a risk standpoint, in your experience, what areas of risk do you feel if someone wants to bring in a virtual CISO, where should they start? What should they expect from a risk standpoint? As far as getting all that going.
I'm not sure I understand the question completely.
Yeah,
Try
okay.
me again.
No, sure. So with regards to
I can be clear.
a small organization, right, that wants to bring in a virtual CISO to kind of help them get things under control, right? From a risk standpoint, where would you expect a virtual CISO to contribute the most from that? In that, if that is any clearer, sorry.
Well, if you can make the argument for it reducing risk to the bottom line, that's really what it's about, is the dollars. If I come into an organization, am I going to provide enough value that's actually going to have an impact on the bottom line? Or am I just going to be another regulator coming in and telling you what you have to do, and you're going to have to spend a bunch more money on it? A good CISO can show the value of what they're suggesting to bring into the environment in terms of how that enhances the bottom line. Because if it doesn't, you're just another expenditure. Nobody wants, I mean, everybody wants somebody to spend money on them, but if you can actually go in and talk to them from a risk perspective, and I mean financial risk, that's really what they're concerned about. In fact, I learned years ago that that's the one thing that CEOs and CFOs will always talk to you about is financial risk. That's their specialty. That's their wheelhouse. So when you talk about technical risk, that's not in their wheelhouse. They're not really very familiar with that, generally speaking. And so if you can talk to them about the value that you bring to the bottom line, their ears perk right up. They say, "Oh, you can reduce our financial risk from being attacked with ransomware." Yes, I can do that. That could possibly save you up to $500,000 this year. That gets their attention. Their ears perk up. How much is that going to cost? Okay, then they got to take a look at their budget and do all that. So, in terms of bringing a virtual CISO in, it also depends on how much you want of that virtual CISO's time. Is this something where you want to do you want to front end load a bunch of hours and then taper back off? Or do you want somebody full time, or do you want just somebody part time to answer questions? Sometimes they'll do that. Sometimes they'll hire me just to be able to have somebody they can pick up the phone and go, "Brian, we're thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts on it?" And I give them my thoughts and hang up, and that's it. They make their own decision about whether they want to implement it or not.
Hmm.
Does that help answer that?
It is, yeah. It's interesting. I guess part of it is just trying. If you're a small to medium sized organization and you're trying to, it sounds like if you're trying to justify the cost or understand what the cost is versus the value, organizations, have their own mindset about what that really is.
Right.
Or they just need somebody to run some ideas past them, or do they actually want somebody to come in and provide some value add and kind of keep them on the right.
Right. And as a virtual CISO, you've got that flexibility. You can go all the way from pick up the phone and call me to I'm there 40 hours a week or 20 hours a week, something like that. It really depends on what their need is. That's the other part is that, I've seen this happen. I can't tell you how many times where a technical company will come in and say, "Oh, you need new firewalls, you need new routers, you need to upgrade your code, you need to do this and this." And it winds up, the price ticket on that's going to be, $150,000. And when I come in, I approach it from the angle of what is it you feel you need? Do you feel like you need somebody on just a very part-time basis? Do you need somebody to overlook your technical stuff to make sure that things are being done right? Could it be contracts? You need contracts looked over to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for. That's a big one. There's sort of a slippage that occurs over time with IT companies that you contract with, where their whole goal is to try and minimize their time connected to you, because the less time they spend with you, the more money they keep. And so they're going to try and automate everything they possibly can so that they don't have to spend more time there. Part of my job oftentimes is evaluating that to find out whether or not the customer's actually getting what they're paying for. There's all kinds of aspects of it. Again, it's for me, it's really the key is trying to demonstrate value add to the organization, because if you're not bringing any real value to the organization, it's not a good play. It's just not.
Right.
You're just checking a box again. And if you've got the budget for it, that's fine, but you're just checking a box.
So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about personal qualities. So if I'm a small company, medium-sized company, and I want to start looking for a virtual CISO, what are some of those qualities that I'm going to want to get a good feel for, or I'm going to try to advertise for, so that I know that the individuals are right fit professionally?
Sure. Well,
Yeah,
one of the things I think is top priority is just other customers that I've worked with. Sharing that, of course, with the other company's permission, so that they can call them and go, "What was your experience with Brian? Were you happy with that? Did it bring value to the organization? How much did it cost you? What did you find worked the best?" All those kinds of questions, and feel free to let them talk to your customers if your customers are okay with that. Some of them they don't want it known that they have a virtual CISO. So you obviously have to clear that with the customer. But yeah, I think that's probably it.
Good. Well, so one of the things that I think I've seen is that when I first got into the information technology space, years ago, It's like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. You fight your way through it in
Hmm.
a lot of ways. But if an organization is looking to bring in a virtual CISO, they don't, in my view anyway, they shouldn't really be looking at somebody who's going to fight their way through stuff, right?
Right.
They need to bring somebody in who has that level of
Experience.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, experience. Yeah, so certifications start to become fairly important because then you don't have to explain yourself. You can just say, "Look, I'm certified in cloud security by the world's largest organization that certifies IT professionals in cloud security." That says a lot right there. If I have a certification in IT audit from the largest audit organization in the world, that says a whole lot right there. I don't have to really explain my background and all of that in quite as much detail if I didn't have those certifications. Another thing is just leadership qualities. You've got to have somebody who's willing to dig in and look at the hard stuff, because that's what will get companies into trouble, is not looking at the hard stuff, glossing over and looking at the easy stuff. Pretty much anybody can do that. It's really digging down deep and learning their systems and getting a handle on what could go wrong, and ensuring. Last week we talked about controls, a lot about controls and what's an effective control. That's part of it. I'm constantly looking at the audit aspect of the organization, the technical aspects, the IT technical aspects, like, are your firewalls configured properly? Are your machines being imaged properly? That kinds of stuff. Are you running security scans on all those, blah, 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 all that kinds of stuff. So they also need to have a lot of operational experience. So they need to understand how a help desk runs. They need to understand how an IT shop runs. They need to understand how a security shop workshop runs, so that they can talk to those people on their own level. And that only comes from years of experience. That you're not going to get that out of a book.
Right. Right. Well, I'm working through a little agenda over here on the side, Brian, and you just like hit about 6 of the things.
Well, one other one, if I could toot my horn for a second,
Sure.
I did a workshop, and I wrote a paper on it years ago called Geek Speak for the C-suite, and it was
Okay.
really about learning how to talk to C-level executives for IT professionals. Um, Not so you can convince them that you know what you're talking about, or that you can get them to do what it is you want them to do, but just so that you can have an intelligent conversation. Executives don't like to get slaughtered with technical speak. It's like mansplaining something to a woman. It's just not a cool way to do it. You really need to talk their language. And to do that, you have to understand profit and loss. Again, you have to understand organizational skill, organizational development, stuff like that. So you need, again, years of experience, some leadership qualities, and the ability to look deep down into the organization and across, deep down and across.
And you mentioned, being able to, have those tough conversations. And part of the process of understanding that, it seems to me, is you know over the course of time, a virtual CISO needs to develop the skills of integrity and trustworthiness with
Correct.
with that whole process, right? With that, not only the clients you're dealing with today, but the clients they dealt with 6 months or a year ago, to
Right.
kind of build that reputation. um,
Well, and you also need to be able to demonstrate it. I had an instance 3 or 4 years ago with a client in Indianapolis where, because they had been breached, they had to bring in a third party their insurance company contracted with to do their work, and the the gentleman on the project clearly did not know what he was talking about. Now, he would try to convince you that he had all the certifications and he'd done this hundreds of times, but it was very clear in the conversations that he didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And I had to take the CEO offline side to the side and say, look, this guy's not got it. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and you're going to get into trouble with this. And fortunately, they were able to maneuver around that with the insurance company. But at the end of the day, this guy was from Australia. He supposedly had all kinds of certifications, and he did not know what he was talking about, plain and simple. And to go to I mean, I had to go to this in good conscience. I had to go to the CEO and tell him that. It was not a fun conversation, because the question then becomes, okay, what should we do about it? Well, that's not my wheelhouse, but they're going to ask me that question anyway. So,
yeah. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about specific job responsibilities.
Sure.
And I think that organizations that are looking at this have different ideas about what those responsibilities might be.
Hmm.
Uh, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, um, every organization is going to be different. They're going to have each one's going to have its own needs. So you have to be flexible, and you have to have a fairly extensive, wide background because otherwise you're not going to be able to meet those needs. When they ask you, for instance, can you review our audit for the last 3 years? Um, I was just watching some new series on Netflix or something about scammers. And the episode I was watching last night was about this woman who scammed $53 million over 28 years from a local city government.
Wow.
$53 million. She had this lavish lifestyle with horses and a big house. She made $80,000 a year. And everybody assumed that she was making all this money buying and selling horses. Well, at the end of the day, she got caught. She went to prison. She didn't serve her entire sentence, but she served 8 of 18 years. And the city, uh, let's see, how did they draw back? They were able to get. Oh, they took possession of everything that she had and auctioned it off, and were actually able to draw back 51,000 or 51 million of the 53 million, and then they sued the audit company because the company doing the financial audits hadn't caught it for 28 years, and they sued them and were able to recover more than their 53 million that they lost.
Wow.
Pretty interesting story. So you got to be able to look at things and have hard conversations. If that were to happen on a virtual CISO's watch, it would not be good.
Yeah.
It would not be good.
So understanding, it sounds like the the lay
The
of the land,
business
I guess,
models.
culture, right? The
Yep.
business models, how it
Yep.
works,
Yep.
uh, you know,
Yep.
uh, and then understanding about cybersecurity strategy and how to implement that. Whether or not the business decides to implement the strategy, right? That's one thing, but a virtual CISO needs to be able to talk and communicate that strategy,
Articulate. Need to
articulate
be
it
able
to
to
the organization.
articulate that strategy. Yeah, and the value add to it. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do, and it does. That you just can't be a good virtual CISO without years of experience, and very broad. My background is in manufacturing and healthcare and financial services, in state and federal services. And it took years and years and years of working across those industries to learn the different kind of cultures and the different kinds of challenges that those folks have. So when you're looking at a virtual CISO, you want someone who's got years of experience and broad experience across different industries, so that you get the benefit of that for your
Right.
organization.
Yeah. Um, the other thing that uh, sorry, the other the other thing that I thought was interesting, when you start looking at uh, you know uh, having these conversations with individuals, with organizations. A lot of businesses probably don't like talking about their partnerships,
Hmm.
to folks that aren't full time. But interestingly, those trends I think are changing because organizations have to be more accountable to their third party
Right,
uh, processes, right?
right, right.
Uh, what have you seen in that? What's your experience with regards to that?
Unfortunately, I'm still seeing lots of companies that just simply will not come forward. They're embarrassed. And the other thing that I ran across a bunch of when I was working with the FBI or working for the FBI was, they're not going to call the federal government. They're just not going to do it. They'll call me because I'm Brian and I live up the street from them, or I know about their business because come out and went on a tour. And they'll call me and they'll ask me questions. They will not call the FBI's 800 number. They're just not going to do it. Now, there may be organizations where they have staff and they have protocols and that's required. That's one thing. But we're talking about, a car dealership. Something happens, they get hit with ransomware. They're not going to call the feds. They're just flat out not going to do it. But they'll call me and say, what do you think we should do about this? And of course, that's when I route them as best I possibly can to the correct resources, but they're just most of the time they're not going to do it. They're embarrassed. They really are. It's a shame thing. It's I don't know if you remember back when early would have been 2015 when the HIPAA security rule really started getting hammered. They're really starting to do a lot of audits. They used to have what was called the wall of shame, which was
Remember that?
a terrible thing for them to do. But they would put hospitals and doctors' offices' names up on this website that had been breached, so that people would know that they'd been breached, and didn't do much for their reputations. And I think that scares a lot of people. They feel a lot of shame and remorse over what's happened if there's been a cyber incident. They don't want to talk to anybody about it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
unfortunate.
do they still have that up there?
Pardon me?
Do they still have the wall of shame?
I don't know. I haven't looked for quite some time. I haven't done any healthcare work for a number of years
Yeah,
now.
it's
So
pretty large these days. There's
yeah,
just a ton of that kind of
yeah,
stuff going on.
exactly.
Yeah. The other thing that that I think virtual CISOs need to have maybe a good feel for is the trends in technology. Because I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of over the years, and you probably have too, is just the expenditures associated with older stuff, with
Hmm.
older technical components, and
Hmm.
not wanting to upgrade those because
Or
of
not being able to. Sometimes you're not able to. And
right.
industrial control systems is a great example of that. Some of that technology is old, and there's no way to upgrade it. You're stuck with it. I have a colleague who works at a secure facility, who has an air gapped machine, and the software on it will only run on Microsoft DOS.
Really.
Yep. And so they have to keep spare parts around for that machine because that machine can't recognize anything over a 20 gigabyte drive. It only the type of RAM that it uses hasn't been made in decades. So they have to scrounge around for spare parts for when that machine breaks. A power supply is hard to find for it because they've changed the way those were made over the years. So oftentimes it's a matter of not being able to upgrade or change that technology. So you have to build controls around it to protect it. That's not uncommon at all in really, really old organizations that have been doing stuff for a long time. They've got a machine that does a certain task and doesn't, and there's no new machine that does it, or if it does, it's cost prohibitive. So they just
Sure.
stick with the old one.
Yeah, you don't think about a lot of
Oh,
that kind of stuff. I mean, you hear stories about Windows XP all the time,
right. But
but
you
I
don't
think
go back.
that's the first story I've heard recently about DOS.
And
So
guess what the software runs on? 5.25 inch floppy disks.
no kidding. Wow.
Almost impossible to find anymore. You can buy them on eBay and stuff, but they're really difficult to find, and they're not manufactured anymore. So you don't know how long they'll last. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I was just flashing through, some of the old formatting commands in my head about,
yeah.
the DOS 3.3 or whatever it was.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Uh, so flipping back to the CISO stuff, when we're looking at information security awareness training, that would be something that I think some organizations might be interested in. At what level would you think that a virtual CISO should be involved in that?
Picking the vendor.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't know that the CISO needs to be involved in that in any intricate way because the know before, which is the world's 800-pound gorilla and that
sure,
stuff,
yeah,
they have staff dedicated to helping you develop your own program based on what you need. So my advice is that's the service you need. Let them tell you how to do it. They do it every single day, far better at it than I'll ever be.
yeah. Yeah, they do have a great service.
Yeah,
So I know
yeah.
several folks that have their stuff.
That's what I mean. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the business. Nobody does it better than them that I've seen so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, what about architectural review? So a lot of organizations they're stuck on kind of maybe where they are. Whether or not they think about making the right decisions when they
Right.
purchase stuff. Uh, what kind of value would you expect the CISO to virtual CISO to bring to something like that?
Sure. So typically what I'd see is I'd be brought in because there was a problem. That's the first thing. They don't just magically wake up one morning and go, I think I'm going to hire a virtual CISO today. There's usually a problem, and they bring you in initially to solve that problem. Then you have time, if they want to continue to engage with you, to begin smoothing out the rough spots. That's when you've got time to look at architectural review to find out, unless it's completely blatant, and that's the problem they brought you in for. It's after you've established a relationship with them that you can begin to take a look at the stuff at that level, and make recommendations and begin to develop a strategic plan for any kind of changes. It's like doing the federal highway. You don't just take your truck out one day and start whacking holes in the concrete. It takes
Right.
a lot of
Sure.
takes a lot of planning, because kinds of things can be very disruptive to the business, and you want to minimize that regardless of what you do. So usually that happens after I've been engaged with a customer for a while.
Okay. Um, well, let's talk about the thing that probably everybody wants to know about, and that's the cost
Hmm,
associated with the virtual CISO. So I would suspect there's different levels and that kind of thing, different pricing models. What are your
sure.
thoughts on
Well, again, it goes back to what's the nature of the problem and what are they willing to engage in. Whether, if they're talking about consulting with telephone calls and maybe you want the month's visit, it's usually hourly, some kind of flat hourly fee. If they want to engage in a larger chunk of time where there's X amount of hours per week guaranteed, then the costs begin to come down. It'd be just like, well, I'm trying to think of another example of, if you ran a car shop and you needed a part-time mechanic, you're going to start with them small, and depending on whether you need it or not, you'll decide then whether to bring them in full time or not. Same thing with me. And as you do that, the shorter the number of hours, the more expensive it's going to be. The more that you're willing to bite into, that will help reduce the risks. But you're right, the costs are all over the map. And it also depends how big of organization I have. If I've got 5 other staff and I've got 50 other companies that I'm working with, I may not be as negotiable on pricing as an individual virtual CISO might be. That makes sense because I've got other mouths to feed. I've got to think about those kinds of things.
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting observation, and so it just kind of I guess when you're looking at that, what I think I heard you say is that depending on the type of organization that you're engaging to do a
Excuse me.
virtual CISO service, right? If you're looking at an individual, maybe like what a single shop, like sounds like what your background
Right.
is, then
Right.
you're going to get maybe a lot better deal, I guess, maybe if I can use that word,
Well, I can be more flexible.
in an organization that had
Yeah.
10 virtual CISOs. So
The other thing is, in terms of being more flexible, that also means in terms of what I can do. There may be limitations if you're dealing with a larger organization that has multiple virtual CISOs working with different clients. There are other competing demands where versus most of the time, I kept my time slices to the point where you could pretty much call me 24/7 and I'd be able to answer your call and answer your questions for you. I wasn't so busy with so many clients. That's what some virtual CISOs do is they get so busy with so many clients that pretty soon you start losing that value add of being able to pick up the phone and call, or why weren't you here Thursday at 2 o'clock? Well, I had another client who had this. And like, well, that's not okay. Yeah, I want you here at 2 o'clock. Just like you're really become an extension of their employee pool.
it's interesting to me, I guess, when you're talking about that. I guess the picture I had in my mind is that if you're a small shop and you need something that's just really beyond just a general break fix individual or somebody to do general work, you're really looking to bring in a virtual CISO. You're trying to figure out these are my needs now, and so maybe I'm paying a small hourly rate, or not, it's all relative, but the hourly rate. And then as that need develops, depending on whether or not you have the right individual in that slot, you can
Correct.
actually still, from an organization standpoint, you can build the value in the business case
Right.
over time and get to the point maybe where you're looking at bringing on somebody full time.
That's
Uh,
kind of the idea. My very last client I had before I retired, that's exactly what happened. I spent the last 2 years trying to assist them in finding the right individual to come in and fill that spot, which put me out of work. But that was why I was brought in, was to help with that process, and we're able to find somebody for them. And boom, and now they got a full-time employee who does all that stuff.
Good. Yeah, so that actually was one of the things that was on my list. The full time equivalent comparison,
Right.
right? Trying to figure out kind of where those value points are, and it sounds like you pretty much had some experience, had some thoughts directly related to that.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing too is that as people use you, they begin to think of other things they might be able to use you for. So, for instance, I might get brought in on an hourly basis to come in 4 hours a week and look at all their policies. But in the process of having a conversation with them about those policies, find out that there's other things lacking in the organization. And they might then go, you know what? Well, we think we'd rather you come in a full day a week rather than a half day a week because we want you to address some of this stuff as well. So it just depends on the organization, what their needs are, where they're at in their maturity model. Most of them don't have, unless they're regulated, most of them don't have any experience or idea with structured um, standards such as the cybersecurity framework or ISO or any of those kinds of things. Very little experience with that typically by the time I get called in. Um, and so they may find that, oh, you know what, this is a really good idea. So for instance, I push pretty hard on the cybersecurity framework
Yeah,
because A, it's free, and B, it's a great model. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant stuff built by some of the best engineers in the world. And to not take advantage of that, if you have the time and the staffing, is just criminal. It's just flat out criminal. It's so easy to implement. So yeah, I'm a big believer in that. But oftentimes that's what'll happen is customers will engage with me initially to do some policy reviews or to look at some staffing issues or things like that. And then as they get to know me, I'm going to bring up other things like the cybersecurity framework. Have you guys thought about implementing this? Here's how it can help your organization. Here are the threats that you're living with, that kind of stuff. That's the other thing is they oftentimes have completely irrational views of what the threat landscape looks like because they read stuff in the newspaper, they hear stuff on the internet. They don't really have a clear picture of what it is they're up against. They're just scared.
right. Yeah. Okay. What about resources that might be out there for people that are thinking about bringing in a virtual CISO? Does anything come to mind as far as internet tools or, excuse me, repositories or anything maybe that you've used in the past that might help somebody pick somebody? Sorry, I
No.
kind of sprung that on you.
Yeah. Well, I was waiting for the question to end, so I knew what it was you're asking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it comes down to you've got to find an individual or group that you are comfortable working with, that you feel they have the expertise and the background to be able to bring. They got to be able to talk business to you. You know, how is this impacting my business? What's this going to do to my staff? How are they going to respond? Uh, you and I have had this conversation before, and that is that I used to pride myself on the fact that 99% of my recommendations didn't involve any kind of cost at all, but my customers never wanted to do them. And it's because it required cultural changes. And those are by far the hardest thing to get implemented because people don't like to change. They like doing things the way they're doing. They're convinced that that's the right way to do it. So if you tell them that it's not, then they're going to get really defensive and they're going to fight you on it and they'll drag their feet, be passive aggressive, do all that kind of stuff. So getting cultural change can be really tough, especially if you don't have buy-in from the top. You really have to have buy-in from the chief officers in the organization as well as the mid-level managers to be able to implement those kinds of changes because otherwise it'll just fail. It just won't work.
Yeah, cultural change. You and I have had a ton of conversations about that over the
Yeah.
years. So,
And it's hard because we don't have good actuarial data. to say that, well, if you do this, you're lowering your risk by 12%. We don't have actual actuarial data to support that. What we have is anecdotal data, and that's questionable. Customers should question that. What do you mean you think it'll do this? Well, we can only give you ballparks because we don't have actuarial data. Well, then why should I hire it if you can't prove that's going to do anything? Well, if you find somebody who swears that they can prove it, good luck. I don't want to be around when things blow up. So it's a really, I don't want to use the word, but I guess it's a difficult sell because we don't have actuarial data to back it up. That makes sense?
That makes sense. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we just don't have it. I wish we did.
Yeah, no, it'd make it easier for a lot of folks to make those decisions for sure. So
what I do know is that at the senior levels of law enforcement and other federal agencies, they're begging for our help. CISA, the computer standard, I forget what CISA stands for. I'm blanking on it.
Computer Infrastructure Security Agency or something like that.
Computer Infrastructure Security Agency, as well as the FBI and InfraGard, are all about getting private sector help. And we don't like to do that. Some companies do. Some companies are real open to it. Others just simply are not. But I can tell you that law enforcement is begging to work with companies because they're trying to capture the bad guys and stop them before they hit your organization. And they need your help to do that.
All right. I did see where the FBI took down a organization, international organization, last week or the week before.
Yeah,
that's pretty fun. We'll maybe take a dive at that at some point.
Taking a lot of work to get those things done. Takes
Absolutely.
years and years sometimes of dedicated agent work to get those things done.
Well, we're about at time, Brian. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with folks about virtual information security officers?
Yeah, I would just say that if you are involved in an organization and you're thinking about getting a security officer or wondering what they might bring, find one and interview them. Ask them to come in and do a presentation for you on their services and talk to you about the value add that they bring to your organization. And you might be surprised to find that it does bring some value to the organization.
Great. Okay. Well, everybody, once again, thanks for joining in to our show today, Passion and Hard Work on Cyber Risk Ready. If you found this topic and discussion valuable, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next video. Thank you, Brian.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. See you next week, guys.